Just thanks for the opportunity to be here, to Fairness and to Chris, and thank you, Kate, for that, and to be here with these panelists. You know, the Fairness Campaign in Louisville is really my political home, and the Fairness Campaign and other groups represented here, so it really is special to be able to be here this evening, and means a lot to me. And you know, when you celebrate 20 years of something, then you're recognizing that there was a time when that something wasn't. And what are those converging streams, organizationally, politically, and in people's lives that come together for that something, that incredible birth of fairness? And so that's actually my coming in story, is to talk about some of that political landscape in Louisville and some of those early pre-fairness days, the timeline before 1991, and just a little bit. And so, and in that rich, you know, Louisville's got a rich gay history, a rich gay and lesbian history, a rich gay, lesbian, and bi history, as we develop rich gay, lesbian, bi, trans history, and there are a lot of organizations and people, and I'm not going to get anywhere close to hitting all of those converging streams, but just in the few minutes, I want to lift up a few. One of those is GLHRC, the Greater Louisville Human Rights Coalition, that worked in the 80s to get the Human Relations Human Rights Commission to support a historical artifact by Kate over there, that approached the Greater Louisville Human Rights Commission relations to, I knew I'd forget that, to support an effort to approach the Board of Aldermen to add sexual orientation to Louisville civil rights laws. And there were people who met. There's an attorney who used to live here, Paul Soroff. David Lott lived in that house. Nick Wilkerson, Laura Howler, Donna Mears, and I met for a year planning that campaign. It involved a lot of people. It was a successful campaign. And it's important to note that the Kentucky Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, this is 1985, was there speaking at that hearing, represented that day by Bob Cunningham, but represented other times by other people. And that's the coming in story, the kind of community coming in story, is that the queer work in Louisville was shaped by progressives, progressive queers in other work, not solo, but like really led and launched and moved politically by progressive queers who were doing broad-based work, and by progressive allies, particularly in the black community, who said, let's go with this. And so the Greater Louisville Human Rights Coalition won that campaign, won that endorsement, but then, you know, we weren't really ready. One of the things we didn't really think about was that after we won that, they were going to call up the Board of Aldermen and say, what do you think? You know, we were focused on that. And so then we had the March for Justice, and we were taking our visibility to the streets. And the March for Justice, that was 1986 was the first one, and that was, isn't that right? 87, okay. Then I went to Nicaragua in 86. And that organization had a political action committee, the March for Justice Political Action Committee, and I chaired that committee. And I remember that living room conversation at David Lott's. The March for Justice was kind of known for being made up of some strong-willed lesbians and some nerdy gay men. And we knew that we could not win this kind of effort with just that organization. So we sat in the living room floor, and I might miss some people, but I will lift up Carla Wallace, Susan Rimmers, Lisa Gunterman, David Lott, myself. Please help round out the history if there are other people. And we mapped the city. And we said, who's that guy that organizes the Pride Picnic? His name is Ken Herndon. We didn't know Ken. Well, he's got organizing skills. We need to talk to him, put his name on the list. Who's that guy with the clipboard that organized that gay men's volleyball tournament? That's Jeff Rogers. We didn't know Jeff. Put his name. Somebody's got to talk to Jeff. So we just mapped the city. Who's that husband and wife rabbis who are so progressive. That's the Rappaports. Let somebody talk to them. So we just mapped the city, and we set out to talk to people, and some people said, y'all are crazy. And frankly, some people said, y'all are crazy. We're glad they said you're crazy, because then they didn't get involved. But a lot of people said, we've been talking about this. We've been thinking about this. Let's do this. And so Jane's going to pick up, I hope, the story of where that takes off in her living room. But in between the March for Justice and the launch of Fairness, there was also a very important battle in terms of the hate crimes ordinance. And that was where there were attacks against black families in the community, legislation put forward at the alderman level for hate crimes, and it had sexual orientation in it, and that's what the fight was over. The fight was over the sexual orientation piece, and people had to come to grips with, I don't know what I think about these queer people, but I'm pretty sure I don't think they should be beat up just for being that, and it opened the door, you know, for what was to come next. So I'm done?
No, I want to interrupt.
Okay.
With a question.
All right.
I don't want to cut you off. I just want to move it a little bit in a certain way. That one of the things, because we have a confession to make, some of us got together and sort of talked ahead of time last night, and one thing we talked about that's really important that I'm hoping you could touch on and maybe move forward with Jane's story is the incredible sea change that happened between the sort of invisibility and silence and isolation. And one great story, well, I can't tell a story, about the kind of code name of GLHRC, I think is a good one. But the issue of somehow between that 1985 moment and when Fairness was out in the streets in front of City Hall in 1991, there's a sea change in terms of being able to be visible. So if you could say a word about that and maybe move on to Jane. I'm trying to implement Chris's strategy without knowing a lot about it.
What? I want to say just briefly about that, and then let Jane say more about it, if that's all right with you, Jane. I think having there were things happening. It was the I was going to say this later, but you know, there's a thing about the political is personal, but what I want to do is flip that. And I think that a gift of the Fairness Campaign and these other organizational infrastructures is that the political is very personal. Discrimination is personal, oppression is personal, and I think that having, you know, an infrastructure and having something to place that with and feeling part of something that was bigger and seeing people take risk and say, you know, I can take that kind of risk too, because you did see, you know, move from the time when the press is here and a few people are in the room to the press is here and the room is packed. So just thank you. I want to say a really critical thing about the launch of Fairness, the two I words, intersectionality and intentionality. That there was an intention to the organizing to set out to do this, and that it very much was grounded in being a force against racism in this community and being a force for economic justice and doing the fairness work in such a way that strengthened that broad movement. So thank you.